Welcome to CMMS Radio, a podcast and general resource for all things CMMS, computerized maintenance management software, from selection to implementation to help you make better choices and have a successful CMMS journey. We'll bring in experts along the way to help us learn more about CMMS, facilities operations, and much more. If you need help with the CMMS project, send a message at cmmsradio.com using the What's on Your Mind link. Suggest a topic, share your CMMS story, or ask questions. All right, thanks for tuning in, everybody. Today we are joined by Rob Kalwarowsky, a high-performance leadership coach with Elite High Performance. He's the co-host of the Leadership Launchpad Project podcast. He's an MIT graduate, TEDx speaker with past experience as a senior reliability engineer, asset management specialist, and he truly understands maintenance and reliability quite deeply. Rob specializes in building high-impact leaders who turn their teams into happy high performance that achieve their goals. He helps leaders avoid becoming a-hole bosses and teaches people how to deal with those types of bosses. He's here to help us understand how to get our maintenance teams moving well, what causes these disconnects between leadership and the frontline workforce, and how mindset plays a role. We're going to frame this all within the context of CMMS, but you never know where it's going to go. Rob, welcome to CMMS Radio.
Thanks for having me, Greg. I'm excited to be here, and I've listened to a few of the episodes, and somehow my name comes up. So we're finally here.
Yes, and I really appreciate it. I know you're busy. I mean, you do things all over the world. From wherever you are. You recently did the TEDx talk, and that was in Japan. And I just thought, man, this is unbelievable. I get to connect with somebody that's really doing good stuff that kind of helps almost anybody. It just doesn't have to be about maintenance. It doesn't have to be about computerized maintenance management software. We're going to try to keep it that way. But, so I love what you're doing for leaders and people that are trying to deal with leaders, the teams, and I want to try to kind of understand your backstory and how this really came to be, how it all culminated into what you're doing right now. Could you give us a little bit on that?
Totally. Yeah. So, I mean, I'm a mechanical engineer by trade. As you mentioned, I went to MIT. I worked 10 years in heavy industry in reliability and asset management, everywhere from mining to oil and gas. I did consulting, probably been to, I don't know, 50 to 60 different manufacturing mines, power plants across the board, across North America. Many of your listeners may even know that I used to host a reliability podcast. That's now called Maintenance Disrupted, but it was Rob's Reliability Project at the time. And I struggled with the leaders I had over my career, specifically my first boss, who was not a great leader, very passive aggressive, very unclear in setting expectations. And because of some of the stuff I had when I was a kid, it really brought me to suffer from mental health problems. And so I started getting depressed. And then even I had a suicide attempt in 2013, which resulted from this whole chaos that I was experiencing. And after that, I kind of kept going. I didn't really know how to change, how to get help, but I saw the same stuff that you see and that all of the listeners see. And I saw it, I thought, like, hey, maybe it's just this one place I work at and this one boss, right? But then I saw it at every plant I would go to. It's we've always done it this way. And somehow we're all unique butterflies, even though they're all the same, right? And like, even an example, like literally in the last 2 weeks, I was in Japan. I was talking to folks, they're burnt out there. We talked to the car rental place, and the woman here, she's in Costa Rica in the small town, she's burnt out. I've talked to clients in Europe, they're burnt out. I've talked to folks in North America, they're burnt out. We're all burnt out. It's not a cultural thing. It's not unique to whatever company you work at. It's across the board. And in 2019, I went on my own leadership journey to basically, I wanted to leave corporate and do kind of engineering consulting. And I started learning about emotional intelligence and then went back into therapy. I started learning about what leadership actually was, and I started learning about myself and sort of what led me down that path of like mental health issues. And then since then, it's really been this pivot where I realized that like leadership in heavy industry is not great. But then again, not most leaders are actually bad at their job. The statistics say roughly 65% of leaders are destructive to their workforce and their employees. So this means financial productivity, that stuff, as well as employee well being. And so we're not just talking about, well, got to hit your KPIs. We're also talking about like people's well being, their happiness, and their mental health and physical health. Actually, toxic leadership increases your risk of cardiovascular disease. So, risk of heart attacks and strokes. So, it's not just the fact that depression goes up 300%, anxiety, burnout goes up. It's also you can literally have a heart attack. Um, and yeah, that was when I sort of pivoted. I left engineering. I started coaching leaders. Of course, I've kept developing myself. And then now I coach, I don't know, it's leaders globally. I have an Olympic gold medalist. I have CEOs. I have entrepreneurs. It doesn't matter what industry. We do a lot of mindset work and then a lot around creating high performance cultures. And yeah, that's the long story.
Yeah, it's and I think there's a lot more to it, and something that we can really further explore because I really do think this is applicable to essentially all things, work life, personal life, blending it all together, making these choices that are scary. And when we talk about like CMMS and we're dealing with maintenance environments and the people that have to, maybe figure out how am I going to use this system that I don't like? It doesn't make any sense, but I'm required to do it. And maybe they have a good boss. Maybe it's not a boss that's not getting it, or it's not necessarily toxic. But now they're trying to say, well, why am I doing this? This doesn't help me do my job, and I was doing fine before. Can you talk a little bit about this concept you talk about making kind of high performance cultures and teams within organizations within maintenance? Where are the disconnects and how do people kind of get through that? What kind of stuff would you kind of give them to lean in on to get through those situations? Maybe they don't want to leave their job.
Totally. And this is where mindset comes into play, right? And when I talk about mindset, the way we explain it is sort of like it's an operating system for your brain. So it's kind of the boot programming when you hit the on button, right? Like the computer runs. And there's a bunch of rules in that programming. And those rules in our sense are for people, it's beliefs. And so basically, long story short, the mindset is just a collection of beliefs that you have about the world, which were generally shaped when you were born and 7 or 8 years old, and the experiences you had within that time, as well as those beliefs control 95 to 97% of the decisions you make every single day. And these decisions, most of them are subconscious. So those 95 to 97% of decisions, they're the subconscious ones. You get out of bed, you go to the bathroom, you brush your teeth, you walk the dog, you have a coffee. You're not consciously saying like, oh, I better put 2 milks in my coffee. Or when I'm driving to work, like, you just sort of end up at work, you're like, oh crap, what happened? Right? Like your brain's running and you're not consciously making choices. And so these are the things that you kind of mentioned, right? It's like when we're talking about, I have to do certain things, they don't make sense. That makes you feel powerless. And that's a very strong feeling in folks. And for some folks, that's extremely traumatic, depending on how they were raised, right? And so even if you have extreme trauma around there, go to therapy. If you don't, it's about how do I make this a choice that I'm making consciously. And this can be reframing it from I have to do this to I'm choosing to do this because it's my job or because I want to keep my job or because I want my boss to be happy with me or whatever that is, right? Or it can be something like I'm choosing to work here so I can feed my family or because it hits my goals of, becoming a maintenance manager eventually or whatever that is for you. And so really changing your mind is going to change your environment. And it's not like I have a lot of clients that have gone through programs and they say to me, Rob, I'm happier. And I'm like, well, what's changed? Nothing, just my mind. Right. And that's the big change. And if you want to get deeper, it's like those once we start making proactive choices consciously, we can choose to do anything we want, which is why I ended up on a TEDx stage in Japan, why I'm now in Costa Rica. A few years ago, I never would have been able to make those choices because I had beliefs. Well, I have to live in Canada because I've always lived in Canada. I have to, work in engineering because my dad said, like, you got a degree, don't waste all that money you spent on your degree by not working in engineering, right? Like, you have to have a stable job, you have to live in a stable country, you have to, all these things. And once you free yourself from those beliefs that you probably aren't even aware that you have, that's when you can choose what you want to do.
Wow. This so just a little aside is that, a lot of these things you're talking about, I'm passionate about because um, yeah, there was a time I wanted to become a psychologist. I didn't finish the degree necessary because
Yeah.
life happened, right? But when you're telling me all these things, and I know for everybody listening, they're like, well, "What's this got to do with CMMS?" Well, don't forget we're human beings, and you're not going to take away the human element when it comes to our experiences of the world. That includes what we choose to do, our work. And I think that the doers, the frontline workers, really want to turn wrenches and get stuff done. I mean, it's great. It really is. And what you're describing reminds me of this concept of being stuck, which can happen to everybody. And then the shift in the mindset is really, really challenging because of those beliefs, whether we're talking about a system that you believe is garbage and you shouldn't have to use it, or, you're feeling forced like to have to do something. If you're using that perspective, you're gonna have resistance as opposed to when you actually make the conscious choice and make a practice of making the conscious choice to say, I'm going to do this because that's going to get me what I want. Of course, there's a lot more to this, but I'm reminded of all those things about moving through the world is about it's really about perspective. And those beliefs can really get in the way. They can make us pissed off and angry. They can make us uh, feel resentful towards our bosses, the companies that we work for, that we might have been for 2, 3 years and just love it there, right? I mean, it happens all the time. So
Mhm.
now I want to shift into you're really passionate about leadership and the right kind of leadership that I think would be like filled with empathy, maybe a leader that actually leads you somewhere instead of telling you, or something like this. So how does that play a role in eroding the phenomenal individuals we have on the front line? In your view, how does that play a role in kind of ruining the situation for the team that's doing the work?
Totally. And this is why, like what you're mentioning, Greg, is we've all been to plants where there's, the old kind of curmudgeon guy who's like, no one ever listens to me. I know everything that's wrong in the plant. And I don't even want to tell you anymore because, like, I'm exhausted of, I've told everyone for 20 years, no one's ever done anything. And I'm just going to sit here. Right.
Yeah.
And you go, like, well, what are you doing to change your situation? Like, if you don't like it here, I mean, you're a well qualified person. You could get another job at another plant or something. And they're never doing anything like that. And I'm not blaming them. It's the status quo in your mind is safe, even if it's incredibly painful. And so, for folks out there, you're listening to this and you're going, like maybe I want to change. Maybe I want to try something new. Maybe I want to change some of the beliefs that I have. those are good questions. And if you have those, come see me, right? But it's like other folks, you can say, well, you might be thinking, hey, this guy's a hack. Like he's talking about like this manifestation, which I'm not, but I have that trigger word too, manifestation, and just like a Ferrari will fall from the sky and I'll be rich, right? That's all bullshit. Okay. but but and that's also part of your brain going, I want to protect you from going on this journey because it's scary. You have to turn the mirror in on yourself in order to go on this journey. And for some parts of you, that's incredibly terrifying. And so give yourself compassion for whatever you think, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, to get into your question, Greg, about leadership, right? The best types of leaders empower their people to go out and solve problems. They sort of move things out of the way. So then, like, they move barriers, whether that's like processes, tools, budgets, resources, whatever. So then folks can go out and do. Like, employees want to work on their strengths. They want to be developed. They want to be heard. They want to be able to execute their jobs to the best of their abilities. And they want sort of this environment where the leader's a coach, not this command control army general, right? And like you can like go on gallup.com. The research is there. It's proven out. So that's where I want leaders to go. And when we think of a toxic boss or a bad boss, we think of like Gordon Ramsay yelling at the people in the kitchen, right? Like, you're a donkey. That's actually only around 5.5% of the workforce experiences a leader like that. Now, for some reason, all those leaders are in mining and manufacturing, um, but it's actually statistically quite low. Like a lot of bosses that you'll notice they're called, there's a significant amount that are called ghost managers. They're the folks that say stuff like, well, that's upper management's decision, or I don't want to micromanage you. Why don't you figure it out? They're just people who don't want to make decisions. They don't want to accept accountability, which we see a lot in our industry because folks are scared that, like, if I make a decision and the thing breaks or the KPIs don't hit, then it's on me. And so a lot of leaders are like, well, and they don't really decide anything. They don't really tell you, they don't give you guidance, they don't coach you, they don't help you. They just kind of float around. And then there's, yep,
I'm curious just about that in particular. I don't want to break your thought, but I want to know this.
yep,
Do they know it? Do they know it, or is it kind of an autonomous feature of how they've gotten to where they are?
yes. The answer is it's usually autonomous. So 90, Dr. Tasha Eurek is an organizational psychologist, and she's written a book about self-awareness. And her research says that 95% of people think they're self aware when only 12 to 15% of people actually are. And so everyone listening basically thinks they're self aware when, roughly, one out of six actually are walking around with self awareness. Now, this doesn't mean that like you're this, healed Buddha, whatever, right? But it could just be like self awareness is like, I know what my values are. I know kind of how my mindset works and things about me. And I understand like how, Greg, you're interpreting my behavior right now. Like that's kind of self awareness. And for the most leaders, and actually the number one leadership skill is actually self awareness. And so the folks that aren't self aware are typically the ones that end up in these destructive behaviors because they're just using basically some version of coping mechanisms that they learned in childhood that meet their needs. And like a 7-year old was not running, a multi-million-dollar plant, right?
Yeah, yeah. It's amazing when you really think about it and try to process that. It actually makes sense. That's what's kind of scary. But these are more. Those are a little bit less common when it comes to the ones that are really brutal. But this, I think, what you're talking about with these like ghost managers, I get a sense that that's pretty darn common out there. So you were going to carry on and tell us some other boss styles, right?
Yeah. So like the ghost managers are around 8%. So slightly more, not super high. There's about 16% of managers are considered messy. This means they're just, they don't really know how to manage effectively. So they'll give unclear instructions. They won't really give you deadlines. They won't really tell you what they want. They'll just kind of like throw stuff at you and then hope that you figure it out. And again, like the beliefs that lead to this are either like maybe they didn't learn management, or it's like, I don't want to accept responsibility. So I'm just going to throw some ideas at Greg. And then when he screws up, it's not on me.
Ah, okay.
Right? Like
Yeah.
we don't really know the mindset of these leaders. We just know that that's a thing. Then then we get into these like purely abusive and actually sort of actively destructive leaders. So these are ones like where we started off with like the Gordon Ramsay type, or like someone like I don't know. Let me think of like who's a good bad boss, like Darth Vader, right?
Okay.
Like we're choking people out when they're not doing their job, right? So like that's around 5.5% of the workforce experiences them. Then we get into more common. So around 20% of the workforce experiences a boss that's called an abusive narcissist. These are ones that it's me first, and I'm going to yell and I'm going to threat and I'm going to punish my people around me. So then I feel better about myself, but also I feel like this is somehow getting me the results I want to get. That's super, like 20% of people experience that. Like that's really common. And like we see that. I mean, I've seen that in at least every plant I've ever been to, from folks who are frontline supervisors all the way to plant GMs, right?
Yeah.
And then kind of the final type is there's sort of two, we call them combination types. It's like a passive aggressive and then a passive egocentric. The passive aggressive, I mean, everyone knows what passive aggressive is. That's what it is. Like they won't say it to your face, but they'll walk around your back and say it. And then we have the passive egocentric, which is like, I'm going to take credit for everything that's good and I'm going to deflect all blame, but I'm not going to do it in front of your face.
So quick question about that. I'm just going to throw some things out there. So, for everybody listening, we're in our CMMS environments. We're working at a plant. We're facilities managers. We're building engineers. We're janitors. I mean, everything, right? We're trying to get stuff done. And we've got some kind of a boss at some level, whether it's freaking CEO or somebody else. And they're saying things like, oh, we've always done it that way. Or they're saying things like, look, just do what you're told. And I got, or how about this one? I'm only one man. I want to understand that one right there, because I
Yeah.
think the we've always done it that way. We know what that is. I think that's pretty treacherous, and I understand the practical applicability of that, although it's absent progress, right? It's absent innovation. But what about these guys and gals that might say something like, "I'm only one man. I'm only one woman. I can't do everything for you." Where does that
Yeah.
fall in the kind of continuum of what you're describing on boss types?
Yeah. I would guess that's somewhat of a ghost manager. Now, it depends what behaviors they have around that. So often folks aren't like super categorized in this one. I kind of see them a bit like kind of combination of the few, but I think when we look at the research is talking about like what's the dominant type. And
Got it.
yeah, I mean the lack of accountability is like three different types of these bosses,
Yeah.
right? And that's why we end up with these cultures where it's like if everything goes great, well, Rob's a genius, right? And then when everything doesn't go great, well, that's Greg's fault because, like,
Yeah.
Greg should have done better, right?
Right.
And this is like consistent behavior around. Like, I was listening to Jeffrey Pfeffer's book, The Seven Rules of Power. He's a Stanford
Oh
professor
yeah.
and very, very well known for writing. He's written 3 or 4 books on power. And like one of the laws of power is like literally it's like people, if you have enough power, people won't even understand or remember what you do. And they just want to be close to you. So you can just like deny, like Trump style, like just deny everything. And like there's no consequence to doing this.
Yeah. Yeah. And all this just keeps coming back to the work environments, right? So it's like for me, I'm sometimes careful about calling people out and really just like shredding and going like full scorched earth. Doesn't mean I don't want to, but I think about like in the world of CMMS. If I'm talking about vendors, I always say things like, they're all trying to do their best, and I think that's actually a true and fair statement.
Yep.
However, after that, and when we start to take a deeper look, there's going to be things that aren't being done right within their approach. But I can't be the authority on that because it ebbs and it flows and it's got peaks and it's got valleys. And then when I look at organizations that utilize CMMS, I could say, well, wow, you picked a great solution. You went through this process and you selected a solution. I don't care if you paid a low price, a high price, something in between, and you're implementing this. And I come to find out, or we can probably guess, they left out all the frontline workers, the doers, the mid-level managers that, could have said, well, there's these 3 things that we have to have no matter what you pick. Whatever you pick, we'll go with it, but we need these 3 things. And they didn't do that. Now they've got it and they're forcing it on people. And I
Yeah.
don't think that organizations want to do that. I think that they do that because organizations are moving and there's so many parts, and I don't quite know how to solve it. So I like to be careful about calling it out, but I'm not going to lie. I like a little poke, or like really calling it like it is, because I mean we're all living in the real world. So how what would be your strategy if we've got a maintenance team, not just an individual, but we've got maintenance team, or maybe a leader of a maintenance team that's trying to effect this cultural change, and some of that stuff is in place and they're not allowed to change systems. They can't do much with changing the process. What can they do to improve the culture and say, hey, we hate that, but we're going to find a way to be successful with it? What are some good things they could do to make that happen?
Totally. And this is what we talked about on LinkedIn when we went back and forth after Jim's episode, right? Is like I totally I believe this too. When I was in heavy industry, like I was like, all they care about is money, and I was like, I'll just do a good cost benefit. I'll show them how much money there is. And like, this is where everyone will buy in because like that's all they're out there for. And then you do that and you go, and people are like, "Oh, I don't care." And you're like, I was like, well, what am I supposed to do now? Right. And this is the mindset piece, not only your own, but it's also under once you start doing your own. And if you look at the emotional intelligence model from Daniel Goleman, emotional awareness or self-awareness comes first. And then once we have that, we can start learning how to manage our own emotions, manage our own mindset, and we can also start to use both of those to get to empathy, and then finally we can get to relational intelligence. So before we can get to how do I influence and impact teams, I got to start with me. And then also, when I start to understand empathy and my own mindset and the beliefs I have about the world, now I can start to see that in other folks. And not that maybe like we won't have the same necessarily the same beliefs, but I can say, well, Greg is driven by this belief of, you know, I want to be seen or I want to be accepted, right? And so now we can start to understand how do I communicate to somebody who's like that in order for them to see things my way. This is relational intelligence, but it takes you a way to get a way to get there.
I got something once you're done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So now we're on, and this is a subject that I'm passionate about. I'm not saying it's easy to achieve. I've got a long time. I'd consider him a friend, a mentor, on and on like this, where we've done some stuff we've been working on the side. There might be a book later on, whatever. Okay, so I'm no authority on this, but I'm passionate about this. whenever I hear something that reflects it, I just have to call it out.
Yep.
And I'm talking about influence. And what's important about influence, regardless of what you read, regardless of what you're told, in my view, which again, look, ask everybody. That's what you need to really figure this out. But influence is really about the other, hearing the other. Think of it as, a child comes to dad or mom asks them to do something, they say no. And then instead of mom or dad saying, hey, or a boss, hey, what are you crazy? You don't talk to me like that. They go, why not? And they're listening, they're understanding. And now all of a sudden we're moving on a path towards influence, because if you want to have influence, you must, there's no denying this, you must be influence able, because absent influence, you have only one thing, and it's called a power struggle. Is that about right?
Well, without
Generally?
influence, you don't have power.
Right, because everybody's, you basically have a fight on your hands or a debate or something like that. Whereas when I understand what you're looking for and I make what I'm after about what you're after, now all of a sudden we're moving in the same direction, and we're not as bristled up, and we're actually getting some things done, because now we're not only both bought in, our needs are being satisfied, and we can focus on that goal we want to deliver for the organization, for the family, for ourselves. That's what I'm thinking anyway.
You're totally bang on, right? And that's the thing, right? Is like when you ask the question, like, what should the manager do? It's one is their own self work, but the other side is just listen. Like so many of my clients, after we have our first meeting together, they say, no one's ever listened to me like you did. And
Mm.
that's because the vast majority of people don't listen. So people say things, you're thinking about, oh, what should I say next? And then you're thinking about, well, actually I got to walk my dog. I got this other project I got, 6 Teams chats. I got 20 emails. Like, what's going to happen with the, and it's like nobody feels heard.
Yeah,
And this doesn't need to be like, you're a manager and you're listening to your people's mental health problems, although that can be a thing.
sure.
It can literally be like the guy going, hey, this pump over here has a leaky seal. Like, we should fix that. And you going, absolutely, we should fix that. Like, let's make a work order. Or even it could be like, even if you don't think it's important, it's still like, hey, Greg, I really appreciate you bringing this to my attention. In terms of priority, it's not hitting the list. And so, like, I totally want you to keep bringing me these things, but, you know, right at this point, we can put it in the backlog, but it's not going to get fixed anytime soon. So I'm not saying like you have to action everything, but you have to listen and hear the person and make them experience that you listened.
With intention and curiosity, because now that's that. Yeah, I love that. And I also understand, I think that when we're in these situations, in our maintenance operations or otherwise, we've got so much going on, we can forget how to do that, or we neglect doing that, because we are in fact under the pressure to keep moving, and it feels painful to stop and actually do that, when in fact the investment in that time and listening could produce the actual desired outcome, right? It's like, so again, this, I keep getting all these ideas from what you're saying, and it's like, uh, company A picks CMMS platform A. They go and they do all this stuff, and then later they find out, oh man, it's not going to work. We're going to have to do this, and this to make it right. You don't even have to switch systems, but they're going to be so unable to do that, because that time they put into it is going to feel treacherous. Oh, we're losing time, efficiency, and all that, when in fact 18 months later they might level up in a huge way. And it's just this resistance, right? So we see that with, I guess, with relationships, organizational movement, et cetera, it sounds like to me.
Everything. And
Man.
here's the thing. So when you mentioned like we can't listen because we're always on the next thing. None of that is anyone's fault. So
Right.
there's no blame. This is actually a protection mechanism in your brain that kicks in. So I'm a big fan of internal family systems. We use it in our coaching practices. And also, we've had Dr. Richard Schwartz, who invented it, a world renowned psychologist. He's been on the pod to talk about it. And what generally we have basically in his model, we have generally kind of three different types of what they call parts, but we can think of it as the voices inside our head. Because we're not like we I know we've all been taught like you have one voice and you're one person and all these things, and if you have multiple voices you're crazy, and then yet like we see on TV like the devil and the angel on the shoulders and like
Yeah.
you know like the one voice saying like oh you should go out and like go drinking or like you know and so that's all true, right? You don't have a mono mind, and it doesn't mean you're crazy.
Right.
Everyone is the same. And so basically your brain is divided into what we would call hurt child parts. These are things that happened, like they were parts that happened any event in childhood that was painful, or even like let's say you went to war and you saw your friend die or something, that would create a part that's called, and they're called exiles, but in general for most people they're child parts. And then for each one of those you have, they're called protectors, or you can also call them defenders. These are the parts that most people reflect every day. And so these are the parts that make you work really hard and burn out. They're the parts that make you, um, you know, try to get people to like you. They make you, try to win a gold medal. They make you try to make more money. They make you take credit from someone and deflect blame from someone. They make you addicted to alcohol, sex, drugs, gambling, whatever, like whatever that is, or they make you eat a pint of ice cream when you're sad. These are the parts that run most people's lives. They're also the parts that sort of deny human contact because it can be painful. Or it just can be something like if I'm stuck in this mode, and I was literally this, is I need to make more money, I need to perform eventually because then it means my dad will accept me. Obviously that's not true because it's a belief, but that was the goal. Then I don't actually give a shit about what I'm talking to you about. I'm just out for myself and how do I make more money. So I'm not going to listen. I mean, I'll listen, but I'm always thinking like, what do I got to do next? Where it moves me towards this element where I'm going to get promoted or I'm going to save the day or, whatever. Right.
Yeah.
And so when folks, that's where the deeper work comes into play because there's the third category, which I didn't tell you about yet. It's called self. And this is who you actually are. When you strip away the pain and you strip away the defense, and it's just you. And it's the great things that everybody has: courage, confidence, creativity, compassion. And like it opens up, even stuff like creativity and just like these elements that people, and you're in this, and I'm sure everybody's experienced this who's listening, when you've ever felt like in flow, whether that's like playing an instrument or playing sports or like, singing or like playing a video game, like doesn't matter what it is, but you feel so grounded and feel so like in the moment. That's ultimately the goal, is to bring more of that into your life. And by healing the other stuff and allowing these parts to go away, you can have more of that. And that's when you can connect with folks, even in small moments, even under high stress, even under these really intense situations where you won't have to feel like you have an agenda to prove. Like when I stepped onto the TED stage, I wasn't trying to prove how smart I am or how like or like get folks to be like, "Oh wow, Rob's amazing." I was just like, this is what I believe is true and what the research says and all these things. And like, this is the message I want to share with the world. And it's not this element of like, they better take it. Otherwise, I'm going to like, I'm going to feel horrible. Or it's like, I need to force it onto people because otherwise they're going to not accept it. And it's a subtle shift, but everyone listening can hear it and can feel it. And that's where the leaders go from average to good or good to great. Is it's that like energy you feel around them and how they attract you versus they're sort of like you're kind of scared of them and you feel that anxiety or you feel that like they're not listening or that kind of the inauthenticity that we feel a lot, it like just doesn't feel right. That's the switch.
Man, very, very, very interesting because I think you're right that anybody that hears that is is going to understand it somehow, some way. We've experienced it, and it's like, you know, human beings are an incredibly terrified species, and to be vulnerable, I mean, it's like the absolute best you could possibly be, and it's the most scary thing. So if I'm, in my job dealing with all these different things, and then I want to just be, and I do that, well, I'm going to get fired. I can't say, I hate this CMMS because it doesn't do this one thing because da 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 da, or whatever it might be. I mean, this is a thing that everybody wrestles with. And then there's the, oh, put on your big boy pants or big girl pants or whatever you want to call that. And you just suck it up and all that. I get that too. But when you do encounter someone, especially in a leader that is, I'm going to use a term you used today, wide open, right? When we were talking earlier, wide open, where they just are, doesn't mean that that protective layer isn't going to pop up sometimes. I mean, sure, you can't go walking around telling everybody your deepest darkest secrets necessarily, but you can come into being and actually be a boss that, I say, when you have a boss that gives a shit and is passionate, that's where I've always said the real stuff happens, even if they're abrasive, aggressive, super direct. But if you look close enough, you'll see and feel the empathy, and you'll see that they're aware that you're a human being,
Totally. Yeah.
and human beings can do a hell of a lot. We all know this, but when they're stifled and in those traps that you're kind of talking about and describing, again, I'm not calling anybody out. I'm calling something out that's just kind of whatever and everywhere. I mean, this is outstanding stuff for people. Um, I I kind of wanted to switch this because this is a really tough one to kind of resolve and say, hey, in 40, 50 minutes, we've got this nice packaged little thing. I mean, this is going to get a lot of you out there thinking. And I think that's the goal, Rob, for people to think and start to understand that you can do a little bit of work and the reward's going to be really big just for you. You don't count that
That
financially necessarily. You count that in these other things. But I wanted to switch it and just switch the question. A couple of
yeah,
fun questions, if you're cool with that.
absolutely.
So, what is your favorite type of music?
Oh, that's a good one. So I've been listening a lot lately to like electronic dance music, like the like Martin Garrix, Tiesto, like those kind of guys. So I guess that's what's been new. But also weirdly, so since I got home from Japan, I started trying to learn the guitar. So I'm listening to also acoustic guitar. So
Ah,
I got a bit of both.
yeah, that's cool. Yeah, learning guitar. I mean, I haven't been able to do it. And I admire you for doing that. That's pretty cool. I got a buddy that he loves flamenco, and that
Amazing.
kind of, I mean, just the way they play, that's crazy. How about a favorite hobby or sport? And this doesn't have to be perfect, but just generally speaking, a favorite hobby and or sport.
Oh yeah, I mean, obviously, I have to say my favorite sport's water polo. I played
Yeah.
for about 20 years. Unfortunately, here in Costa Rica, it's not a thing. But yeah, I love it. I still watch it on YouTube, so it's good.
Yeah, I got that friend I was telling you about. His son, just an amazing water polo player,
Yeah.
and he convinced me one day, hey, go online and watch this match. I'm going to be there watching him. And it's just incredible what happens in that game. Because for years I thought, well, what the hell is this? What are these guys doing in the water? And they're playing this game. Oh my God, there's all kinds of stuff going on. I mean, you're getting shots under the water in the ribs, and you got
Oh yeah.
big guys banging around, all this kind of stuff. And he was like a junior Olympian and all this kind of stuff. I mean, it's just it's a pretty incredible sport. I don't think I could ever play it because you're staying upright and all that. So that's pretty cool to know about you. And I read about that. I wasn't sure if you were going to say that. So now this is my last question, and then I'm gonna do a little bit of a closeout because hopefully we can do some more of these later if you're open to it.
Totally.
Not
I'm
just the
always
questions,
available.
but the episodes.
Yeah.
What is your favorite thing about living abroad, whether it's where you're at now or where you've been? Because I know you went from you were in North America or Canada, right? You went from
Yep.
Canada and now you're in Costa Rica, and I have a sense of some of the things you might like about it, just because I've been to one country that's got some similarities, but never been there. So I'm just curious, what is your favorite thing about that?
For me, it's the energy. Now, it's weird, but it's like literally my neighbor, one of them is a coffee farmer. Like there's a field of coffee beans, like literally right there. Um, the other one has chickens. The guy across the street has turkeys. Like
Mm,
we're basically in the mountains of Costa Rica. We're 35-minute drive from like a small, well, the town's like 100,000 people or something. Um, but like it's just relaxed, and that's the biggest thing. Like I'm from Ottawa. I don't know, it's about 1 million people. It's not huge, but it's like, and then I went to college in Boston, which I loved, but I think like I did some interviews in New York City and I was like, wow, that's a lot. And like Tokyo, like we went to Japan, I don't know, 2 weeks ago, and it was like, wow, Japan's a lot. Like there's 40 million people in Tokyo, and like literally all of Costa Rica is like 5.5 million or something.
yeah, yeah, it's amazing, and I'm the reason I asked the question is I wanted to hear some of that stuff because first of all, it's a big challenge to make that kind of a move.
Yeah,
And I've got a buddy of mine that lives abroad. He moved to Thailand. And
yeah.
it's not for what everybody out there is thinking. It's because he can live a different lifestyle that somehow it has some elements of peacefulness. It has some elements of happiness that you don't see in places that are abundant. So it kind of flips on its head where you see this abundance and all that. So that's great. Well, what I like to do, Rob, is first and foremost, I really appreciate you being here with me today and sharing all this for everybody that listens to CMMS Radio, anybody that
Thank you.
is going to
Yeah.
watch it later. Um, so a couple things for everybody out there. You can find Rob in several different places, and I encourage you to reach out to him and connect because he's willing to connect and give advice, help out, listen, all these great things. So you can go Rob at elitehighperformance.com. You could also check him out on LinkedIn and just search Rob Kalwarowsky, which is Kalwarowsky. Number three, check out the Elite High Performance YouTube channel. And I would encourage you to watch the Journey to TEDx Talk. That's an interesting one, but every single one of those is great. Then you can also find Rob on all the different social networks, the Instagrams and whatnot. And I just wanted to ask you, Rob, did I leave anything out there on how people can reach you?
No, that's great. Like on Instagram, I'm Boss Coach Rob K. I'm also on TikTok if you like that. The Instagrams and the TikToks are a little more leaning into humor and going on the attack a little bit, where the LinkedIn stuff's a little bit, more corporate-y. Um, and actually, so for folks out there, so to go along, my TED Talk was titled "How to Deal with an Asshole Boss," and I have a free ebook for that. So if you head on over to howtodealboss.com, you can get the free ebook there. And there's also a course for how to deal with a bad boss. So if you have an asshole boss and you want to learn some tips and strategies on how to do that, there's a program there as well. And yeah, for users here, if you send me an email, or if you just use the code, I think it's HTD50, you'll get $50 off. So just do that. Or actually, we'll make up a code. If you use the code CMMSradio, you'll get $50 off the program. We'll make that happen. And then, yeah, totally connect with me, reach out. Happy to help.
That's awesome. So everybody, just to remind you, when you go and you sign up for that, use the code CMMS Radio, and you'll get $50 off. We didn't even talk about that, so that's great. I appreciate that for everybody. That's going to help them out. And Rob, again, I really want to thank you for joining me today, and I hope we get to do this again. A couple different times. I think as I come up with subject matter over the next several months, I'll come up with a few things where I say, I want Rob talking about this because, you're just seeing it from a perspective that can help everybody. So again, really appreciate it, and looking forward to the next one.
Yeah, thank you so much, and put it in the calendar. Let's go.
All right, cool.